few months ago, I visited Zambia as a journalist to report on the country's health system. While there, I learned that there are 8 million people in rural Zambia, but only 6 surgeons. Most Zambian surgeons prefer to live and work in the cities. This is a problem for people in the countryside. Life-saving surgery is time-sensitive, and many patients die or become disabled because it takes too long to get to an urban hospital. Now, many editors would have their journalists stop their reporting there and publish a piece about how people in Zambia are dying because there aren't enough surgeons. I'm sure many of you can think of examples of stories you've read that follow a similar pattern, that highlight a problem that seems too big to solve, and that leave you, the reader, to sigh in despair. I didn't go to Zambia to write that story. Rather, I wanted to write about surgery because I heard the Zambian government was responding to this problem creatively. 10 years ago, the government began training clinical officers who only have basic medical training in a few life-saving surgeries. They undergo a difficult and competitive training program, after which they become medical licentiates and are given financial incentives to settle in the villages. To date, there are about 120 medical licentiates in rural Zambia, and everyone I met in the health system spoke highly of how they improved surgical outcomes. A senior surgeon even admitted that he saw a licentiate perform a C-section better than he could. Now, medical licentiates are certainly not a silver bullet solution, but they have made a sizable dent in the problem. They've also proven to the world that it's not impossible to provide decent health care to people in rural Africa. A month after my story was published in a New York Times column called Fixes, I heard that it prompted discussions in the Zambian Ministry of Health to expand funding for the licentiate program. Like any journalist, I was thrilled that the article had an impact in the real world. And the change came not through highlighting a major problem in society, but rather by focusing on a credible effort to solve it. This journalistic orientation towards looking at solutions is not mainstream. In fact, it's countercultural. For decades, journalists have been taught the importance of spotlighting wrongdoing, of investigating major scandals, of muckraking, of making sure David Petraeus keeps his pants on. And in response, nearly 80% of Americans believe it's the journalist's job to report bad news. It's necessary to report bad news, and many times hard-hitting investigations can lead to huge changes in society. After Upton Sinclair published The Jungle in 1906, which exposed the deplorable working conditions in meatpacking factories, there were systemic changes to how American factory workers were treated. But a steady diet of bad news can totally destroy people's vision of the world. For most of us, the news is what helps us see beyond our immediate surroundings. Sadly, there will always be tragic events for journalists to report. Mass murder, extreme weather, gang rapes. But that's not all the world has to offer. In every corner of the globe, people and institutions are working to improve the status quo. And many of the things people are trying are actually working. For example, in Mississippi, there's a maximum security prison that at one time had more than its share of fights, stabbings, and prisoners with depression. The usual punishment for troublemakers, of course, was to lock them in solitary confinement. But then one day, officials began to question, what if solitary confinement were the root of the problem? So the prison tried closing its solitary cells, and they made life for inmates more social. To everyone's surprise, inmates were better behaved, the prison saved millions of dollars, and the suicide rate plummeted. Imagine if every politician and prison official knew that there was a way to potentially save taxpayer money and improve the lives of inmates. Just think of the possibilities. Mainstream journalism needs to change so as to represent the world more accurately. We need to balance out the steady stream of problems and crises with an equally steady stream of solutions journalism. To be clear, solutions journalism is not just good news. It doesn't simply celebrate an individual for helping an old lady cross the street or creating a wheelchair for a disabled pig, who, of course, is named Crispy Bacon. These stories can be heartwarming, but they don't get people thinking about systemic change. Rather, solutions journalism is every bit as rigorous as the most hardcore investigative reporting. The journalists must still ask the hard questions, look for evidence to back its claims, and explain the broader significance of an idea. The difference is that instead of stopping after exposing a problem, solutions journalism explores the response as well and presents evidence on how successful or unsuccessful it is. I'm working with a group called the Solutions Journalism Network. We're approaching top newsrooms around the world to change the culture of journalism by mentoring journalists and running workshops with editors. We're also offering resources to individual journalists who want to pursue solutions-oriented reporting projects. Through my work with the network, I'm often reminded of the reason I left my job in management consulting for the more lucrative career of journalism. In January 1997, New York Times columnist Nick Kristof wrote an article about how inexpensive it is to fight diarrhea, which kills 1.5 million children a year. He explained how things like clean toilets, good drinking water, and education lead to huge improvements in child health. Bill Gates, who was then happily heading Microsoft, stumbled across Kristof's article and was apparently struck by how solvable many of the challenges seemed to be. Gates credits reading that article as the reason his foundation now gives $800 million every year to improve global health. He even has a framed copy of the article in his Seattle office. That, to me, underscores the power of a well-told solution story. Kristof's story at once gripped his reader, educated him, and inspired incredible action. In this generation, I hope more mainstream journalists will use their voices to cover all the news that's fit to print, which will always include the bad, but that must also include those who have, in some way, improved the state of the world. Thank you.